The air in what was once my living room, mine and Michael's, was thick enough to choke on, vibrating with a poisonous energy. David, my son, stood before me, his face a grotesque mask of fury, spittle flying as he jabbed a finger perilously close to my face. How many times do I have to tell you, old woman? Your time here is done. Over. Finished. This is our house now, Tiffany's and mine, and there simply isn't any room left for you or your ancient, dusty memories. Can't you get that through your thick skull? His voice, a booming, unrecognizable torrent of contempt, echoed off the newly ostentatious, ridiculously expensive wallpaper Tiffany had insisted upon, a gaudy pattern that had replaced the gentle roses Michael and I had chosen together so many years ago. Tiffany, draped over David's arm like a predatory vine, smirked, her eyes gleaming with a cold, reptilian satisfaction. Honestly, David darling, you're being far too patient. We've been over this. Some people just cling on, don't they? Your things, Sarah, are on the porch. We were even generous enough to pack them for you, though frankly, most of it should have been thrown out ages ago. It's all so dreadfully drab. We've called a taxi, it should be here any minute. So, if you could just expedite your departure? We have plans. Big plans. And you, well, you're not part of them. My own son, the boy I had nursed through fevers, whose scraped knees I had kissed better, whose every childhood fear I had soothed, now stood before me like a stranger, a puppet animated by the cruel, avaricious strings of the woman clinging to him. His eyes, once warm and full of love, were now glacial chips of disdain. Each word he hurled was not just an insult, but a physical blow, a fresh wound carved into a heart already aching with the loss of his father. This house, built not just with bricks and mortar but with decades of shared dreams, laughter, and tears, was being stripped of its soul, and I, it seemed, was being discarded along with the drab remnants of a life they deemed worthless. You can't be serious, David. I finally managed, my voice a reedy whisper against the onslaught of their vitriol. This is my home. Your father. But he cut me off, a harsh, grating laugh escaping his lips. Father? Oh, please. Dad would have wanted me to be happy, to live my life. And my life, our life, he gestured possessively between himself and Tiffany, who preened under the attention, is just beginning. We need space to grow, to entertain, to live like we deserve. And you, mother, with all due respect, which isn't much, frankly, are in the way. You're a relic of the past, and this house is being upgraded for the future. Our future. Tiffany chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness that was more insulting than outright malice. Think of it as a new adventure for you, Sarah. A lovely little room somewhere, perhaps? Much more manageable for someone of your advanced years. Less to clean. David has been so stressed, you know, worrying about you being here all alone in this big old place. It's really for your own good, if you think about it. We're practically doing you a favor, freeing you from this burden. The sheer audacity, the twisted logic they employed to justify their cruelty, was breathtaking. They weren't just kicking me out, they were trying to gaslight me into believing it was an act of kindness. I looked at David, searching for any flicker of the sun I knew, any hint of remorse or conflict behind the hardened facade. There was nothing. Only impatience, a chilling selfishness, and the reflected gleam of Tiffany's ambition in his eyes. He truly believed this, every venomous word. He had chosen. He had chosen her, this life of shallow materialism, over family, over decency, over the memory of a father who had given him everything. The weight of that realization was immense, a crushing stone on my chest, but beneath it, something else began to stir, a cold, quiet resolve Michael had always admired, a strength I had forgotten I possessed. As that taxi, a temporary chariot of banishment, pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the son who was no longer my son and the house that was no longer my sanctuary, the cold night air did little to cool the inferno raging within me. Each shouted insult, each dismissive gesture from David, every venomous smirk from Tiffany, replayed in my mind like a horrific, endless loop. How had it come to this? How had the beautiful tapestry of love and family, woven with such care over decades with my beloved Michael, unraveled so completely, leaving only these ugly, gaping holes of betrayal. It wasn't a sudden storm, no, this was a slow, insidious rot, a creeping poison that had been working its way through the foundations of our lives ever since Tiffany, with her perfectly manicured claws and diamond-hard heart, had first sunk them into my son's unsuspecting flesh. This house, you see, it wasn't merely a structure of wood, brick, and glass, it was the living, breathing testament to a lifetime of shared dreams and quiet devotion. Michael and I had sketched the plans ourselves on countless napkins at our small kitchen table in our tiny newlywed apartment, long before David was even a twinkle in our eyes, dreaming of rooms filled with sunshine, the scent of baking bread, and eventually, the joyous chaos of children's laughter. We'd hammered nails alongside the builders during its construction, our hands blistered but our hearts full, chosen every fixture with earnest debate, planted every single rosebush in the garden with our own earth-stained fingers, each bloom a promise of future beauty. Every corner held a whisper of his comforting voice, a lingering shadow of his gentle smile, the echo of his footsteps on the stairs. The worn spot on the polished wooden floor by the grand stone fireplace was where he'd sat every evening without fail, lost in his books, his feet propped up on the old ottoman I'd needlepoint for him, the very air around him seeming to hum with contentment. The faint, sweet scent of his particular brand of pipe tobacco, a comforting aroma I had adored, still clung stubbornly to the air in his study, a room Tiffany had declared musty, depressing, and reeking of old man, within a week of her first unwelcome visit, her nose wrinkled in theatrical disgust. Michael, oh, my wise, loving Michael. He possessed the keenest eyes, a heart that understood the subtle, often treacherous, currents of human nature far better than I, with my tendency to see only the good, ever could. He'd been unfailingly charming and polite to Tiffany, of course, for David's sake, especially in those early days when our son was so utterly besotted. But I saw the almost imperceptible flicker of reservation in his gaze when she spoke, heard the unspoken caution, like a softly chiming bell, in his voice during our quiet moments alone, tucked away in the sanctity of our bedroom. She's a remarkably pretty thing, Sarah, there's no denying that, he'd conceded one evening, long before she and David were married, as we watched her from the window, laughing a little too loudly at something David said, her hand possessively on his arm. But watch her eyes, my love, when David talks about his future, about the business, about his inheritance. They glitter a little too brightly, don't they? And it's not with love for our boy, I greatly fear. Some people, Sarah, are collectors of shiny things, and sometimes those shiny things are other people's lives and fortunes, their peace of mind. His words, then a gentle, almost abstract warning, now echoed with the force of a prophetic scream in the desolate, grief-stricken hollows of my heart. He'd also remarked, with a sad shake of his head after Tiffany had gushed about a friend's, fabulously wealthy, much older husband, that some women see a man not as a partner, but as a stepping stone, or worse, a bank vault to be cracked. The transformation in David wasn't immediate, not a sudden, shocking metamorphosis. It was a gradual erosion, like relentless water dripping on stone, each drop a tiny betrayal, each splash a further distancing. First came the subtle shifts, the missed Sunday dinners that had been sacrosanct in our family, excused with flimsy justifications about networking opportunities or client meetings that always seemed to involve Tiffany's expensive tastes. Conversations became stilted, guarded, as if he were constantly speaking lines fed to him, his natural warmth and humor slowly being extinguished. Tiffany, always present, always subtly steering him with a touch, a glance, a whispered suggestion, would offer saccharine excuses that dripped with insincerity. Oh, David's just so incredibly busy with his new promotion, Sarah, he's under enormous pressure, he needs his rest, you understand. Or, with a dazzling, false smile, we were thinking of a more contemporary, minimalist look for the lounge, don't you think? Your things are absolutely lovely, of course, so charmingly traditional, but perhaps a bit dated for a young, successful couple like us? Each suggestion was a tiny, perfectly aimed chisel, chipping away at my place, at Michael's cherished memory, at the very essence of our shared home, making me feel like an unwanted, anachronistic fixture in their grand, emerging design for a life that had no room for the past, or for me. My dear friend and steadfast neighbor, Martha, a woman whose own life had seen its share of storms and who possessed a spirit as resilient as tempered steel, She saw it all with painful clarity. She has no patience for fools or manipulators, and her blunt, unvarnished assessments of Tiffany were often a source of secret, guilty comfort, though I always cautioned her to be careful, fearing Tiffany's vindictive nature. "That girl's a viper in silk stockings, Sarah," Martha would hiss over a strong cup of tea in her own cozy, welcoming kitchen, a true sanctuary compared to the increasingly alien and hostile landscape of my own home. "She's got David so thoroughly hypnotized with her batting eyelashes and her constant, poisonous talk of a lifestyle he foolishly thinks he's owed without earning. And he's letting her. He's forgetting the mother who sacrificed everything, who poured her heart and soul into raising him. Don't you dare let her push you out, Sarah. You fight for what's yours, for what Michael would have wanted, for your dignity." Her words were a balm and a spur, but fighting against the tide of Tiffany's relentless ambition felt like battling a tsunami with a teaspoon. Fight? Oh, I tried, believe me, I tried. In my own quiet, perhaps too gentle way, I attempted to breach the wall Tiffany was so expertly constructing around David. I attempted to talk to him, to reach the loving, considerate son I knew was buried deep beneath layers of her suffocating influence and his own burgeoning greed. I'd recall specific, cherished memories of his childhood, of his father's immense pride in his smallest accomplishments, of the values Michael had strived to instill in him, hoping to stir some dormant ember of love, of loyalty, of basic human decency. But it was like speaking to a beautifully polished, impenetrable wall. He'd listen with a carefully blank, almost bored expression, his eyes darting towards Tiffany for cues, then parrot some rehearsed, hollow line about the importance of moving forward, or Tiffany's brilliant vision for their future, or, most woundingly, how I was being overly sensitive, stuck in the past, and resistant to necessary change. Each failed attempt left me feeling more defeated, more heartbroken, more profoundly isolated, as if the very language of love and family was one he no longer understood, or perhaps, had been systematically conditioned into forgetting, deeming it irrelevant to his new, glittering aspirations. The escalation was cunning, a masterclass in passive aggression and psychological warfare, orchestrated with chilling precision by Tiffany, with David as her increasingly willing, or perhaps simply pathetically weak-willed, accomplice. My favorite armchair, Michael's old, worn leather reading chair where he'd spent countless peaceful hours, disappeared one day without a word, replaced by a hideously sleek, chrome glass monstrosity that Tiffany had found at a fabulous, unmissable price. When I finally gathered the courage to ask, my voice trembling, David mumbled something evasive about the old one being broken beyond repair and terribly unhygienic, his gaze fixed on the floor. Sentimental photographs of Michael and me, of David as a giggling toddler on his father's shoulders, of our happy family holidays, were gradually, almost stealthily, moved from prominent places on the mantelpiece and side tables to dusty, forgotten corners, then unceremoniously into boxes in the attic, dismissed as clutter that didn't fit the new aesthetic. My opinions on anything, from the ghastly color of the new silk curtains she insisted upon to the ruthless destruction of the vegetable garden Michael had so lovingly designed and tended, were first politely ignored, then openly ridiculed as terribly old-fashioned and out of touch with modern living. I was being systematically erased from my own life, from my own home, piece by painful piece. I remember one particularly bitter, soul-crushing evening, a wound that still throbs with a fresh, sharp pain. Tiffany, in a whirlwind of self-important activity, had redecorated Michael's beloved study, the sanctuary where he had penned his thoughts, managed our affairs, and read for hours. She had transformed it into a garish, sterile, home office for David, complete with a monstrous, reflective glass desk that showed every fingerprint and chrome shelving units that looked like they belonged in a laboratory. All of Michael's treasured books, his carefully collected first editions, his handwritten journals filled with his elegant script, his very essence, were unceremoniously dumped into flimsy cardboard crates in the damp, cold garage, as if they were refuse. When I discovered this desecration, my heart didn't just shatter, it felt as if it had been ripped from my chest and stomped upon. "David," I'd pleaded, tears streaming down my face, my voice choked with a grief so profound it was almost physical, "your father's books. His life's passion. His legacy. How could you allow this? How could you?" He'd stood there, a muscle twitching in his jaw, unable to meet my anguished eyes, while Tiffany, ever the puppet master, placed a perfectly manicured, proprietary hand on his arm. Now, Sarah, she'd cooed, her voice like poisoned honey, a grotesque parody of concern. Let's not be overly dramatic. It's just old paper, after all. We need this space to be functional, to be an environment conducive to David's career and success. Surely, you want him to succeed, to climb the ladder? Success, in her debased vocabulary, was clearly measured in square footage and dollar signs, not in sentiment, respect, or the preservation of a good man's memory. That night, the silence in the house was heavier than any sound, filled with unspoken accusations and the death of something precious. That very night, I clutched Michael's photograph to my chest, the small, silver-framed one I now carried everywhere in my worn handbag as if it were a sacred relic, and I remembered his quiet, reassuring words from so many years ago, spoken as he signed some complex legal papers at his old, imposing oak desk, the scent of beeswax and old parchment filling the air. This house, Sarah, our home, it will always be your safe harbor, your inviolable sanctuary. No matter what happens in the turbulent seas of life, no matter who tries to rock the boat or steer it onto the rocks, I've made absolutely certain that you are its anchor, its rightful captain. There are safeguards, my love, carefully constructed provisions within these documents that only a true and honest heart would understand and appreciate, and only a false, greedy one would ignore to their ultimate peril. He had tapped the thick stack of documents then, a small, knowing, almost mischievous smile playing on his lips, the very same smile I had desperately tried to emulate as I walked out of that house only hours ago, leaving my son to his hollow, fleeting victory. My Michael, with his profound wisdom and boundless love, had foreseen the possibility of this treacherous storm, and with meticulous care, he had built me an ark, strong enough to withstand any tempest. They had mistaken my pained silence for weakness, my unshed tears for surrender, my quiet dignity for defeat. They had no inkling of the unyielding steel Michael had so carefully forged in my spine over our long years together, the precious legacy of his foresight and unwavering protection he had entrusted to me, hidden within the dry, impenetrable legal jargon of his last will and testament, a document I knew David, in his newfound, Tiffany-fueled arrogance, and Tiffany, in her all-consuming avarice, would never have bothered to scrutinize with any real diligence or true understanding. They were far too busy planning their extravagant parties, mentally spending their anticipated, unearned fortune, and systematically erasing every trace of the past to make way for their glittering, utterly empty future. They were dancing with gleeful abandon on the deck of a ship they foolishly believed they captained, utterly, blissfully oblivious to the massive, unyielding iceberg of truth looming directly in their path, an iceberg Michael himself had meticulously charted and whose coordinates were now firmly in my possession. The reckoning was coming, and it would be as swift and as devastating as their own cruelty. Huddled in the sanctuary of Martha's small, chintz-covered guest room, the scent of lavender and old, beloved books a stark, comforting contrast to the metallic, soulless newness Tiffany had imposed upon my home, sleep was an impossible dream. My mind, a relentless projector, replayed not just the final, brutal confrontation, but a horrifying reel of countless earlier moments, seemingly insignificant at the time, that now clicked into place like tumblers in a complex, insidious lock. This wasn't just David being weak or Tiffany being greedy in the moment, this was a meticulously crafted campaign, a siege laid against my peace, my security, my very identity, likely plotted by Tiffany from the very moment she'd assessed David's prospects and my perceived vulnerability. The sheer, calculated audacity of it still stole my breath, still ignited fresh waves of fury that burned away the tears before they could even fall. I remembered Tiffany, early on, long before Michael had even fallen ill, making what I then dismissed as innocently curious inquiries about the house. "Oh, Sarah, this is such a magnificent property. Is it very valuable?" she'd asked, her eyes, those predatory, assessing orbs, sweeping over the gardens, the structure, lingering on the antique grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from Michael's parents. I'd naively answered, speaking of its sentimental worth, of the memories it held. She'd smiled, a thin, almost pitying expression, and changed the subject, but not before I saw a flicker, a cold, appraising gleam that had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with market value. She was inventorying her future assets, the cold-hearted vulture, even then. And David, my David, how skillfully she had played him, isolating him from anyone who might offer a dissenting voice, a reality check to her poisonous whispers. Old family friends who had known him since he was a boy suddenly found their invitations to dinner unanswered, their calls unreturned. His cousins, with whom he'd shared countless childhood adventures, were dismissed by Tiffany as a bit too provincial, darling, not really our crowd anymore. She created a glittering, superficial bubble around him, filled with her equally shallow acquaintances, people who admired her designer labels and his pliability, people who would never question her motives or challenge her assent. He became a king in a tiny, gilded cage of her making, oblivious to the bars she was so carefully constructing around his heart and his conscience. The betrayal wasn't just in the final act of eviction, it was in 1,000 smaller, daily surrenders, a continuous, soul-destroying erosion of everything Michael and I had built and believed in. I recalled a specific, chilling incident a few months after Michael passed. Tiffany had found some of his old investment papers while helping David organize the office. She then, with an air of profound financial wisdom she clearly didn't possess, started questioning David relentlessly about them in my presence. Are these diversified enough, sweetie? Shouldn't we look into more aggressive growth strategies? We can't just let your father's money sit there gathering dust, can we? David, who had always deferred to his father's cautious, steady approach to finances, had looked uncomfortable for a moment, then, under her insistent gaze, had actually agreed, parroting her words about modernizing the portfolio. He was already speaking her language, thinking her thoughts, his father's sound judgment jettisoned for her get-rich-quick fantasies. Her cruelty wasn't always overt, not in the beginning. It was often cloaked in that sickeningly sweet solicitude, that feigned concern that was more insulting than outright abuse. She'd fuss over me in public. "Oh, Sarah, you look a little tired, dear. Are you sure you're up to this?" making me sound like a frail invalid, while simultaneously ensuring any plans I might have had were subtly sabotaged. She'd accidentally spill things on my clothes before an important outing or misplace items I needed, always with a flutter of apologies and wide-eyed innocence that fooled no one but David, who seemed determined to see her as a paragon of virtue. The constant, low-level psychological warfare was exhausting, designed to make me doubt myself, to make me feel like a burden, to make the idea of my eventual departure seem not just desirable to them, but inevitable, even a relief to me. And David's complicity, oh, that was the knife that twisted deepest. I saw him change from a son who, while perhaps always a little too eager for an easy life, still possessed a fundamental kindness, into a cold-eyed stranger who mirrored Tiffany's disdain. He started to criticize my cooking, the very meals he had once devoured with gusto, now finding them too heavy or not sophisticated enough, phrases that reeked of Tiffany's snobbery. He stopped asking for my advice, and when I offered it, he'd listen with a veneer of impatience, his eyes flicking to his phone, before dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. The man who, as a boy, would bring me wildflowers from the field behind our house, now couldn't even bring himself to look me in the eye when he relayed Tiffany's latest demand for some outrageous extravagance or her newest complaint about my interfering presence. The true extent of their conspiracy, however, began to dawn on me with chilling clarity as I replayed one particular conversation I'd inadvertently overheard. I'd been in the garden, hidden by the large rhododendron bushes Michael had planted, and they were on the patio, believing themselves alone. Tiffany's voice, sharp and calculating, was unmistakable. "It's just a matter of time, David. Once the estate is fully settled, and we have complete control, we can sell this mausoleum and get that penthouse downtown. But we need her out before then. Her moping around casts a pall over everything. We need to make her want to leave. Make it uncomfortable. Make her feel like she doesn't belong." My blood had run cold. This wasn't just about space, this was a deliberate, orchestrated plot to drive me from my own home, discussed with the casual cruelty of planning a hostile takeover. And David? He hadn't protested. He'd merely murmured, "Whatever you think is best, Tiff. I just want this to be over. Over." My life, my home, my connection to his father, all dismissed as something to be over. It was then, sitting in Martha's spare room, the raw wound of their final, brutal words still bleeding, that a different memory of Michael surfaced, a beacon of fierce, protective love. It was from a time he'd been quite ill, not long before the end. He'd called me to his bedside, his voice weak but his eyes filled with an urgent clarity. He'd held my hand tightly and said, "Sarah, my love, if anything ever happens to me." David is a good boy, but he can be easily led, especially by a pretty face with a calculating mind. I've made some arrangements. Henderson knows everything. Trust Henderson. He will protect you, and he will protect what is rightfully yours. Never forget that this house, our life's work, is your fortress. Don't ever let anyone take it from you. At the time, I'd been too overwhelmed by his illness to fully grasp the implications, dismissing it as the concerns of a dying man. Now, his words resonated with the force of a divine intervention. Mr. Henderson. The key. The next morning, as the pale dawn light crept through Martha's curtains, my hand trembled as I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Henderson and Associates, a number I knew by heart from Michael's many years of relying on their counsel. Each ring seemed to echo the frantic thumping of my own heart. What if Michael had been wrong? What if Tiffany's greed had somehow found a loophole? But then, Mr. Henderson's calm, familiar voice came on the line, a voice of reason and integrity in a world that had suddenly tilted into madness. "Sarah. My dear, I was so terribly sorry to hear about Michael, and I've been meaning to reach out. Is everything all right?" His genuine concern was like a balm to my frayed nerves. Taking a deep breath, I poured out the whole sordid story, the eviction, the cruelty, the utter desolation I felt. He listened patiently, without interruption, a few sharp intakes of breath the only indication of his reaction. When I finally finished, my voice hoarse with unshed tears and righteous anger, there was a brief pause. Then, Mr. Henderson spoke, his tone now imbued with a steely resolve that mirrored the fighting spirit rekindling within me. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm and unwavering, "Michael was not just a client, he was a dear friend. And he was a man of extraordinary foresight. He loved you deeply, and he anticipated, with a heavy heart, that something like this, some form of egregious disrespect or avarice from David, particularly under an unhealthy influence, might one day occur. He put safeguards in place, Sarah. Ironclad safeguards. The will is not merely a distribution of assets, it's a testament to his love for you and his commitment to your lifelong security. That house is yours, unequivocally and solely yours. And as for David's access to the wider estate, well, Michael included some very specific, very stringent conditions regarding his behavior towards you. Conditions I fear your son has just catastrophically violated." A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. Michael. My wonderful, prescient Michael. He had known. He had prepared. He had armed me for this very battle, even from beyond the veil. "Mr. Henderson," I managed, my voice thick with emotion, "what do we do?" His response was immediate and decisive. "We act, Sarah. We act now. I will gather the necessary documents immediately. You and David and his wife are about to have a very different kind of conversation about property rights and filial duty. They thought they were closing a chapter. They have no idea they've just opened a Pandora's box of their own making, and my dear friend Michael, in his wisdom, ensured you hold the key to slam it shut on their greed. The fight wasn't over, it was just entering a new, more powerful phase, and this time, I wasn't alone. I had Michael's love, Martha's loyalty, and the full force of the law, guided by Mr. Henderson, on my side. The ground beneath David and Tiffany's feet was about to shake. The drive with Martha to my own street, to the house that was about to become a battleground, felt both agonizingly slow and terrifyingly fast. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, a wild mix of dread, righteous anger, and a desperate hope that Michael's foresight would indeed be the sword of justice I prayed it would be. Mr. Henderson, bless his calm and resolute soul, had arranged to meet us there, timing his arrival with a precision that spoke of his experience in such grim matters. He wasn't coming alone, he'd mentioned a junior associate and, if necessary, a uniformed process server to ensure everything was handled strictly by the book, a stark contrast to the lawless cruelty David and Tiffany had enacted upon me. Martha, her hand gripping mine with a supportive warmth that radiated strength, parked her sensible car a little down the street, giving us a clear view of my front porch, of the door I had walked out of in stunned silence less than 24 hours before. We didn't have to wait long. Mr. Henderson's distinguished dark sedan pulled up smoothly to the curb. He emerged, tall and imposing in his impeccably tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed to hold the weight of destiny itself. Beside him was a younger man, equally professional, his expression somber. They walked with measured, deliberate steps up the garden path I had trod with Michael 1,000 times, a path now leading to a confrontation that would change everything. The doorbell, whose cheerful chime I had once loved, now sounded like a funereal toll in the tense silence. I watched, my breath caught in my throat, as the front door opened, and there stood David, a look of mild, entitled annoyance on his face, clearly expecting a delivery or some other mundane interruption to his new reign. Tiffany, I could just glimpse her, was lounging on the new, ostentatiously vulgar sofa she'd bought, idly flicking through a glossy magazine, the queen in her ill-gotten castle. Mr. David, last name? Mr. Henderson's voice, though not loud, carried an undeniable authority that cut through the morning air, and I saw David's casual posture stiffen slightly. Tiffany, disturbed by the unfamiliar tone, slowly lowered her magazine, a frown creasing her perfectly made-up forehead. I am Arthur Henderson, your late father, Michael's attorney. And this, he gestured to his associate, is Mr. Davies. We are here on an urgent legal matter pertaining to this property and your father's estate. The shift in atmosphere was palpable, even from where Martha and I sat. The air, already thick with unspoken resentments, now crackled with a new, dangerous energy. David's initial annoyance morphed into a guarded suspicion, while Tiffany's eyes narrowed, her internal radar likely screaming that this was not the kind of legal matter that would result in more money flowing her way. Mr. Henderson, without waiting for an invitation they were clearly not going to offer, stepped just inside the threshold, his presence instantly commanding the space. David, he began, his voice calm but devoid of any warmth, I have some rather distressing news for you and your wife regarding your occupancy of this house. Your father, Michael, in his last will and testament, a document I have here, he patted the briefcase, was extraordinarily clear. This property, located at, full address, and all its chattels, were left solely and exclusively to his beloved wife, your mother, Sarah, last name. Your right to reside here was always contingent upon her explicit permission, a permission which, given yesterday's unfortunate events, has unequivocally been revoked. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum into which all their arrogant assumptions, all their cruel calculations, were sucked and extinguished. Tiffany was the first to break, her voice a shrill, disbelieving shriek that bore no resemblance to her usual carefully modulated tones. What? What on earth are you talking about? That's preposterous. This house is David's. Michael promised him. David, tell him. Tell this ambulance chaser he's lying. She scrambled off the sofa, her face, moments before a mask of bored affluence, now contorting into an ugly snarl of disbelief and fury. David just stood there, his jaw slack, his eyes wide and uncomprehending, looking from Mr. Henderson to Tiffany and back again, like a man who had just been struck by lightning from a clear blue sky. He stammered, my father, he wouldn't. He told me, this house, it was always meant to be mine after Mom. His voice trailed off, the lie sounding weak even to his own ears. I'm afraid your recollection, or perhaps your understanding, is tragically flawed, David, Mr. Henderson stated, his gaze unwavering. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick, legally bound document, placing it firmly on the ornate console table Tiffany had recently installed in the hallway. This is a certified copy of your father's will, signed and witnessed. The clauses regarding this property are unambiguous. It belongs to Sarah. Entirely. And given that you forcibly and cruelly evicted her yesterday, she has, through me, demanded you vacate the premises immediately. You have 24 hours from the formal serving of this notice, which Mr. Davies will now provide. The younger man stepped forward and handed a crisp legal document to David, whose hand trembled so violently he could barely grasp it. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost, a hollow imitation of the confident man he had pretended to be. Tiffany, however, exploded. Her carefully constructed facade of a sophisticated lady shattered into a million razor-sharp pieces, revealing the grasping, venomous creature beneath. 24 hours? Are you insane? We live here. This is our home. You can't just throw us out. David, you useless, spineless fool, she screamed, turning on him with the ferocity of a cornered animal. You told me this was secure. You swore your father had left it all to you. You let that old woman outsmart you? You let her and this shyster lawyer waltz in here and ruin everything I've worked for? Her voice cracked on the last words, a note of raw panic now underlying the rage. The work she was referring to, of course, was her relentless campaign of manipulation and greed. David finally found his voice, but it was a choked, desperate sound, nothing like the booming arrogance he had displayed towards me. Mr. Henderson, there must be some mistake. Dad loved me. He wouldn't do this to me. Mom wouldn't. He looked wildly around, his eyes landing on me and Martha as we slowly exited her car and began to walk towards the house, drawn by the undeniable pull of unfolding justice. His face crumpled further when he saw me, a flicker of something, shame? Fear? Crossing his features before Tiffany's renewed onslaught reclaimed his attention. She's behind this. Tiffany shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me as I reached the edge of the porch. That conniving old witch. She planned this all along. She was probably laughing at us yesterday. It was then that Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to him, his expression now tinged with a profound sadness, yet utter resolve. Actually, he said, his voice dropping to a more somber register, your father, Michael, did anticipate that a day of profound disrespect might occur. He loved his son, David, very much, but he was not blind to certain influences or potential weaknesses. And so, he left not just a will, but also a letter. A letter to be opened and read in circumstances such as these. My heart leaped. A letter? Michael had left a final message? Mr. Henderson reached into his briefcase again and produced a sealed envelope, bearing Michael's familiar, elegant handwriting. He instructed me to read a portion of it, should this day ever come to pass. The air grew still, charged with an almost unbearable tension. Even Tiffany, for a moment, was shocked into silence. Mr. Henderson opened the letter, his hands steady, and began to read. Michael's words, spoken through his trusted friend, filled the opulent, soulless space Tiffany had created, each syllable a testament to his love, his wisdom, and his sorrow. My dearest son, David, Mr. Henderson read, his voice imbued with the gravity of the moment. If these words are being read to you, it is a day I prayed would never dawn. It means you have allowed your heart to be swayed from the path of honor, from the sacred duty of love and respect you owe to your mother, the woman who gave you life, the woman who stood by my side as my cherished wife and partner for so many wonderful years. This house, David, was built not as a monument to wealth, but as a sanctuary of love. Its value lies not in its market price, but in the memories, the laughter, the tears, and the dreams it has sheltered. To treat your mother with cruelty, to attempt to usurp her rightful place, is a betrayal not just of her, but of me, and of every value I ever tried to instill in you. David sank to his knees on the marble floor Tiffany had insisted upon, his head bowed, great, shuddering sobs tearing through him. Tiffany stared, aghast, as if Michael himself had risen from the grave to condemn her. Mr. Henderson continued, Michael's voice now carrying a stern, sorrowful judgment. You were given every advantage, my son, every opportunity. But the greatest inheritance I could ever hope to leave you was not money or property, but character, integrity, and a compassionate heart. If you have discarded these for the shallow allure of greed or the manipulations of another, then you have truly impoverished yourself. This house belongs to your mother, for her lifetime, for her peace and security. Learn from this, David. Learn that true wealth is not what you can take, but what you can give in love and respect. May you find your way back to the man I always hoped you would be. The letter ended. A profound, echoing silence filled the room, broken only by David's choked sobs and Tiffany's ragged, furious breathing. Neighbors, drawn by the raised voices and the sight of Mr. Henderson's official-looking car, were beginning to gather at a respectful distance on the sidewalk, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. The public humiliation, the spectacular downfall Tiffany had so callously wished upon me, was now her own bitter portion. They had given me hours to leave my home. Now, the meticulously crafted legal document in David's trembling hand, backed by the undeniable moral force of his father's words, gave them 24. Their reign of error was over. Their carefully constructed world of entitlement and avarice was visibly, irrevocably, crashing down around them, and the ticking clock of justice had just begun its final, inexorable countdown. Just when I thought the storm of David and Tiffany's immediate fury over losing the house had reached its zenith, just as Tiffany's shrieks about injustice and David's pathetic whimpers of disbelief seemed to fill every crevice of the oppressive atmosphere, Mr. Henderson, that unwavering executor of Michael's final wishes, cleared his throat with a gravitas that sliced through their cacophony like a keen blade. A new, even more terrifying silence descended as he held up a hand, his expression one of profound seriousness. There was more. My heart, already battered, gave a strange lurch, a mixture of dread for the son I once knew and a fierce, almost savage, satisfaction that Michael's intricate planning was about to be fully unveiled. The true depth of their self-inflicted devastation was yet to be plumbed. While the matter of this property is, as I've stated, unequivocally settled in Sarah's favor, Mr. Henderson announced, his gaze sweeping from David's now ashen face to Tiffany's, which was flushed and unbecoming, blotchy red with rage, there is a further, and I must say, significantly more impactful codicil within your father's estate planning, David. It pertains directly to your primary inheritance, the family trust fund your father so diligently established for your long-term security, and indeed, all substantial liquid assets he bequeathed. Tiffany's head, which had been bowed in a momentary, furious sulk, snapped up, her eyes, like those of a starving wolf scenting blood, suddenly laser-focused on Mr. Henderson, a dawning, terrible understanding beginning to illuminate their greedy depths. This was about the money, the real prize she had been hunting all along. Mr. Henderson continued, his voice relentless, a calm hammer chipping away at the last vestiges of their deluded entitlement. Michael, in his wisdom and with a love that was clearly conditional upon reciprocal respect, stipulated in no uncertain terms that your access to these significant funds, David, indeed, the very dispersal of the principal of your inheritance beyond a nominal, almost token sum, was entirely contingent upon your continued, demonstrable, and unwavering respect, care, and material support for your mother, Sarah. He was most specific. Any act of cruelty, neglect, financial malfeasance against her, or any attempt to remove her from her home without her full, uncoerced consent, would trigger an immediate and irrevocable forfeiture clause. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, each syllable a death knell to Tiffany's gold-digging dreams. If Tiffany's reaction to losing the house had been a volcanic eruption, her response to this news was an apocalyptic explosion that made her previous tantrum seem like a minor tremor. She let out a sound that was barely human, a strangled, guttural howl of pure, unadulterated agony and rage, the sound of a gambler who had staked everything on a sure thing, only to watch it all go up in flames. No. No. That cannot be true, she shrieked, her voice cracking, her perfectly manicured hands clawing at her own hair as if she wanted to rip it out. He wouldn't. David, tell me he's lying. Tell me your father wasn't that cruel, that manipulative. This is your money. Our money. She whirled on David, who looked as if he'd been turned to stone, his eyes vacant with shock, and began to pummel his chest with her fists, her blows weak but filled with a desperate fury. You imbecile. You utter, worthless fool. You had a king's ransom in your grasp, and you let it slip away because you couldn't even manage your own mother. You let her, and that old dinosaur Michael, outsmart you. I hate you. David, completely broken, offered no resistance to her assault, simply absorbing her blows with a deadened expression. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a terrifying, hollow understanding of the abyss he had plunged himself into. Mr. Henderson, with a discreet nod, prompted his associate, Mr. Davies, to gently but firmly restrain Tiffany, who was now sobbing hysterically, a grotesque spectacle of thwarted greed. The documents are all in order, Mrs. David's last name, Mr. Henderson stated, his voice devoid of sympathy for her plight. Michael even had psychiatric evaluations done in his later years to confirm his soundness of mind when drafting these provisions, anticipating, perhaps, that their fairness might be challenged by those who felt aggrieved. Every I is dotted, every T is crossed. The forfeiture is absolute. The bulk of Michael's estate, failing David's adherence to these conditions, is to be redirected to various charitable trusts Michael held dear, and a further significant portion to ensure Sarah's continued comfort and security for the remainder of her life, above and beyond the house itself. It was at this juncture that Mr. Henderson played another card from Michael's meticulously arranged hand, a detail that underscored the depth of my late husband's concern and foresight. Furthermore, he continued, looking directly at David, whose gaze was now fixed on some distant point of utter despair, your father had, for some time before his passing, confidentially requested that I, as a trusted friend and legal counsel, keep a discreet watching brief over his family affairs, particularly concerning any undue influence or questionable financial advice being directed your way, David. He was concerned by certain patterns he observed. I have, therefore, a contemporaneous record of various instances, including your wife's persistent inquiries into early access to your potential inheritance and some rather ambitious investment schemes she proposed, which Michael had expressly advised against. This revelation, that they had been observed, that Michael had been so acutely aware of Tiffany's machinations, seemed to suck the last remaining air from David's lungs. He swayed, and might have fallen had Mr. Davies not guided him to one of Tiffany's offensively modern chairs. The sheer, elegant brilliance of Michael's protective strategy was breathtaking. He hadn't just built a wall, he'd constructed an impenetrable fortress around me, with tripwires and alarms that David and Tiffany, in their blind arrogance, had blundered into at every turn. David, finally, lifted his head, his eyes, swollen and red, pleading with me, the very mother he had so callously discarded. Mom. Mom, please, he croaked, his voice raw with unshed tears and abject terror. You can stop this. Tell him it's a mistake. Tell him I'll do anything. I'll get rid of her, he gestured vaguely towards Tiffany, who was now slumped in another chair, glaring daggers at him through her tear-streaked mascara. I'll sign anything. I'll go to therapy. Dad wouldn't want me to have nothing. He wouldn't want me to be a beggar on the streets. Please, Mom, for the love of God, help me. My heart ached with a terrible, conflicting agony. To see my son so utterly undone, so stripped of dignity, was a torment. But the memory of his cold eyes, his cruel words, Tiffany's smug triumph, were still too fresh, too raw. And stronger than any maternal pity was the fierce, unwavering loyalty I felt to Michael, to his wisdom, to the love he had shown in protecting me so thoroughly. David, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, infused with a strength I didn't know I possessed until that very moment, a strength that was Michael's final gift. Your father wanted you to be a man of honor, a man of character. He valued love, respect, and integrity far above any monetary wealth. This situation, this devastation, is not my doing, nor is it truly his. It is the direct and unavoidable consequence of your choices, your actions, your betrayals. You had everything, David, and you threw it all away for her, for a fantasy of unearned riches. Tiffany, overhearing this, seemed to be jolted by a final, desperate surge of avarice. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on a particularly valuable porcelain figurine, a wedding gift to Michael and me from his grandmother, that sat on the mantelpiece. With a sudden, wild cry, she lunged towards it. If I can't have the money, I'll take what I can get. This is mine now. Payment for my wasted time, she shrieked, her painted nails outstretched like talons. But Martha, bless her quick reflexes and indomitable spirit, was faster. She intercepted Tiffany with an agility that belied her years, grabbing her arm firmly. Oh no, you don't, you grasping little harpy. Martha declared, her voice ringing with indignation. You'll not lay a finger on Sarah's property, or Michael's memory. The figurine teetered but remained safe. Tiffany, thwarted even in this petty act of spiteful theft, collapsed into a heap of genuine, albeit entirely self-pitying, hysterics. The full, crushing weight of their new reality seemed to finally settle upon David and Tiffany with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just the inconvenience of moving. It was everything. The money, the status, the future Tiffany had meticulously planned, the easy life David had so cravenly embraced, all gone, evaporated like mist in the harsh glare of Michael's unyielding will. They had schemed and manipulated and betrayed, and their reward was absolute ruin. Their gold mine hadn't just run dry, it had caved in, burying them both under an avalanche of their own making. The 24-hour eviction notice now seemed like a minor footnote to the utter desolation of their prospects. They were truly, irrevocably, on their own, with nothing but the bitter ashes of their greed to show for their cruelty. The 24 hours that followed Mr. Henderson's devastating pronouncements were a blur of chaotic activity emanating from my house, a grotesque parody of a hasty move. From Martha's living room window, where she had insisted I remain, fortified with endless cups of tea and her unwavering, indignant support, I witnessed the public unraveling of David and Tiffany's meticulously curated facade. Movers, hastily summoned and clearly unimpressed by Tiffany's imperious demands and David's dazed incompetence, began carting out the ostentatious furniture, the vulgar artwork, the sheer volume of stuff they had accumulated in their brief, deluded reign. Each item removed felt like a small piece of poison being extracted from the home Michael and I had filled with love, not ludicrously expensive, soulless objects. The fighting energy I felt was no longer just anger, it was the fierce, almost euphoric rush of seeing justice, swift and uncompromising, in action. Tiffany, I could hear her shrill, accusing tones even from across the street, was in a state of perpetual, screeching fury, her voice cracking with venom as she hurled blame at David for everything. He, in turn, seemed to shuffle through the proceedings like a ghost, his face a mask of stunned despair, occasionally flinching as another verbal dart found its mark. The neighbors, bless their discreetly observant souls, were out in their gardens, pretending to weed or prune, but their eyes, I knew, missed nothing of the ignominious spectacle. The whispers, the pitying glances towards David, the scornful ones towards Tiffany, it was the public humiliation they so richly deserved, a far cry from the triumphant housewarming party Tiffany had undoubtedly been planning to celebrate her supposed conquest. My own pain was still a raw wound, but seeing their arrogance crumble into such pathetic disarray brought a grim, undeniable satisfaction. Michael's wisdom was a shield, and also a sword. Their departure, when it finally came, was as undignified as their tenure had been unwelcome. Jammed into Tiffany's ridiculously oversized luxury SUV, which Mr. Henderson had drily informed them would likely be repossessed within days as it was leased against David's now frozen assets, they looked less like a glamorous couple embarking on a new adventure and more like defeated refugees fleeing a battlefield of their own creation. Tiffany's face was a mask of furious resentment, her eyes spitting hatred at the house, at me as I stood on my porch with Martha to watch them go, at the world that had dared to deny her what she felt she was owed. David just stared blankly ahead, a hollow man already haunted by the immensity of his losses. As they pulled away from the curb, their tires squealing in a final, impotent display of rage, a profound silence descended, the silence of a fever broken. Martha and I didn't waste a moment. The first call was to a locksmith, and the satisfying thud of new bolts sliding into place, securing my home against any further intrusion, was the sweetest sound I had heard in months. Then began the reclamation, the purging. With Martha, my rock, my tireless ally, by my side, we opened every window, letting the fresh air chase out the stale perfume of Tiffany's arrogance and the lingering chill of their cruelty. We stripped the beds of their ridiculously high thread count sheets that felt like ice, replacing them with the familiar, soft cotton ones I loved. Tiffany's garish decorative cushions, her faux fur throws, her hideous, modernistic sculptures, they were all unceremoniously bundled into black bags, destined for the charity shop or, in some cases, the dumpster. Each act of removal was a reclaiming of space, a reclaiming of peace, a tribute to Michael's quiet, understated taste. We found Michael's books, still packed away in those dreadful crates in the garage. Tears streamed down my face as Martha and I carefully, lovingly, unpacked them, their familiar scent, the feel of their worn covers a balm to my bruised soul. We restored them to the shelves in his study, which we stripped of its cold, corporate veneer, slowly bringing back the warmth, the personality, the very essence of the man I had loved for over 40 years. We found the old photographs Tiffany had hidden, and with trembling hands, I placed them back on the mantelpiece, on the side tables, their smiling faces a defiant statement against the darkness that had briefly overshadowed our lives. The house began to breathe again, to feel like home, like Michael's spirit was slowly, gratefully, returning to its rightful place, no longer suppressed by their suffocating presence. The phone calls from David started that very evening. The first was a voicemail, his voice thick with a mixture of self-pity and barely concealed anger. He was at some dreadful, cheap motel, he said. Tiffany was screaming at him, "It was all my fault, how could I do this to my own son?" I listened, my heart a cold stone in my chest, and then I deleted it. More calls followed over the next few days, a desperate, pathetic litany of his unfolding misery. Tiffany had apparently taken what little cash they had and stormed out after a monumental argument, leaving him stranded and penniless. He'd lost the leased car. He was running out of options. His pleas became more frantic, more abject, laced with insincere apologies and clumsy attempts to appeal to my maternal instincts. "Mom, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. It was all Tiffany. She put ideas in my head. Please, Mom, you have to help me. I've got nowhere to go." Martha, ever practical, advised me not to even answer. "Let him stew in the mess he's made, Sarah," she'd said firmly, her arms crossed. "He's a grown man. He needs to learn that actions have consequences, real, painful consequences. Michael didn't set up those safeguards for you to buckle at the first sob story." And she was right. My initial instinct, the ingrained motherly urge to soothe, to fix, was still there, a dull ache in my heart. But stronger now was the memory of Michael's wisdom, the knowledge that true help for David wouldn't come from rescuing him from the immediate fallout of his choices, but from allowing him to fully experience the bitter taste of his own medicine. So, I let his calls go to voicemail, each message a fresh testament to his spiraling descent, each one reinforcing my resolve not to interfere with the harsh lessons life, and his father's will, were so intent on teaching him. The contrast between my slowly returning peace and his escalating chaos was stark. While I was rediscovering the simple joys of my home, the way the morning sun streamed into the kitchen, the scent of the roses Michael had planted now blooming defiantly in the garden, the quiet companionship of Martha, David, according to his increasingly desperate messages, was navigating a personal hell of cheap lodgings, dwindling funds, and the terrifying realization that his friends, Tiffany's superficial crowd, had vanished like smoke the moment his financial ruin became apparent. He was alone, truly alone, stripped of the wealth, the wife, and the home he had valued so callously above his own mother, above his father's legacy. The fighting energy within me was transforming, no longer the raw fury of a victim, but the quiet, determined strength of a survivor, a guardian of Michael's final wishes. Then came the voicemail that marked a new low in his trajectory, yet also, perversely, a confirmation of everything Michael and I had feared about Tiffany. His voice was flat, devoid of its earlier histrionics, almost numb. "Mom, it's David. Again. Tiffany's, she's gone for good. Took her suitcases, hailed a cab while I was in the shower. Cleaned out the joint bank account we still had access to, not that there was much left. Said she wasn't going to go down with a sinking ship. Said I was a loser. A mama's boy who couldn't even hold on to his inheritance." A dry, humorless laugh, more like a sob, escaped him. Guess she was right about that last part, wasn't she? The gold digger had finally, definitively, abandoned the depleted mine. It was a cruel, predictable end to their toxic alliance, and as I listened, a profound sadness for the son I had lost mingled with a steely certainty that this reckoning, however painful, was absolutely necessary. The question that now hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, was whether this was the bottom for David, or merely another agonizing step on his long, dark journey toward an understanding he had so brutally rejected. Several months slipped by, each day a small, steady stitch knitting back together the fabric of my life, a life that had been so brutally torn. The house, once a cold monument to Tiffany's garish ambition, now hummed with the quiet warmth of Michael's enduring presence and my own rekindled peace. Martha remained my steadfast companion, our afternoons filled with gardening, shared cups of tea, and the comfortable silences of old friendship. I had even begun volunteering at the local community library, finding solace in the hushed reverence for stories, for words, a world away from the ugly, grasping vernacular of greed I had been forced to endure. The sharp edges of pain were softening, replaced by a resilient calm, a sense of hard-won tranquility. I was no longer just fighting, I was healing, I was rebuilding, I was living again, on my own terms, under Michael's loving, protective gaze from afar. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, as I was pruning the last of Michael's beloved roses, their crimson petals like drops of blood against the fading green, a shadow fell across the sun-dappled path. I looked up, my secateur poised, and my heart gave a painful, unwelcome lurch. Standing hesitantly at the edge of my garden, looking like a scarecrow a storm had battered and then discarded, was David. He was almost unrecognizable. The expensive, tailored suits were gone, replaced by worn, ill-fitting clothes. He was alarmingly thin, his face gaunt and etched with lines of hardship that hadn't been there before. His eyes, those once cold, arrogant eyes, now held a haunted, hollowed-out look of profound weariness and something akin to despair. The fight in him, the aggressive entitlement, seemed to have been entirely extinguished, leaving behind only the shell of the man he had been. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, twisting a ragged cap in his hands, his gaze fixed on the ground as if he couldn't bear to meet my eyes. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable, filled only with the rustle of falling leaves and the frantic beating of my own heart. All the carefully constructed peace I had cultivated over the preceding months felt suddenly fragile, threatened by this ghost from a past I was so determined to move beyond. This wasn't the arrogant son who had thrown me out, this was a beggar at the gates of a life he himself had forfeited. The fighting energy, I now felt, was not directed at him in anger, but an internal battle to maintain my hard-won boundaries, to not succumb to a pity that might betray Michael's intentions and my own healing. Finally, he lifted his head, and the raw shame, the utter desolation in his eyes, was like a physical blow. "Mom." His voice was a mere rasp, a dry whisper almost lost on the autumn breeze. Can I talk to you? Just for a few minutes?" I won't stay long." There was no demand, no expectation, only a desperate, humble plea. I hesitated, a war raging within me. Part of me wanted to order him off my property, to tell him he had lost the right to even speak my name. But another part, the stubborn, residual core of the mother who had once loved him unconditionally, saw the depth of his suffering, a suffering he had undeniably brought upon himself, but suffering nonetheless. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all our shared, shattered history, I nodded slowly and gestured towards the old wooden bench under the oak tree, a bench where Michael and I had spent countless peaceful hours. He sat hunched, his elbows on his knees, his gaze still averted. I don't even know where to begin, Mom," he started, his voice thick with unshed tears. "There are no words, no excuses, for what I did. For how I treated you. For what I allowed Tiffany to do, to say. I was a monster. A blind, arrogant, greedy fool. She twisted me, yes, filled my head with poison about status and wealth and how you were holding me back, but I let her. I chose to believe her lies because they fed my own worst impulses, my own selfishness. I see that now. God, do I see that now." He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming. Every dream Dad had for me, every lesson he tried to teach me about decency, about family, about hard work. I spat on it all. I threw it away for her, for that glittering mirage of a life she promised, and in doing so, I didn't just break your heart, Mom, I desecrated Dad's memory. His confession poured out, a torrent of self-recrimination, of stark, brutal honesty I had never imagined him capable of. He spoke of the weeks and months since Tiffany had abandoned him, the gnawing hunger, the cold nights spent in shelters or on the streets when the money for even the cheapest room ran out, the crushing weight of loneliness and public indifference, the shame of begging for work, any work, only to be turned away because of his unkempt appearance or his lack of skills beyond the superficial world he had once inhabited. He recounted, with a bitterness that was directed solely at himself, how Tiffany had systematically drained every last penny from their joint accounts before vanishing, leaving him with nothing but the debts they had accrued in their pursuit of a lifestyle they couldn't afford and didn't deserve. He painted a picture of a man who had truly hit rock bottom, a man who had been stripped of everything: his wealth, his wife, his home, his pride, his self-respect. The role reversal was absolute, staggering in its completeness. This broken, humbled creature before me, pleading for a sliver of understanding, was a universe away from the cruel, entitled antagonist who had sneeringly told me there was no space for me in his life. Now, he was the one on the outside, looking in with an agonizing awareness of all he had irrevocably lost. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "How could you? I wouldn't forgive me. I had to tell you. I had to say. I am so profoundly sorry. For everything. It's not enough, I know it's not. It will never be enough. But it's all I have left to offer." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with a grief that seemed to emanate from the very core of his being. This was not a performance, this was the raw agony of a soul finally confronting the true magnitude of its transgressions. I listened in silence, my own emotions a maelstrom. There was a deep, resonant pain for the son I had cherished, for the bright future he had so carelessly thrown away. There was a lingering anger, yes, for the cruelty, the disrespect, the needless suffering he had inflicted. But intertwined with it all was a flicker, just a flicker, of something else, perhaps a glacial thawing around the edges of my hardened heart, an acknowledgement of his profound, if belated, remorse. The fight now was to respond with the wisdom Michael would have wished for, to balance justice with the faintest possibility of a redemption he would have to earn, inch by painful inch, over a lifetime. "David," I said finally, my voice quieter now, imbued with a sorrowful firmness rather than the fire of earlier confrontations. "What you did, the choices you made, they carved wounds so deep that they may never fully heal. Trust, respect, love, these are not commodities to be discarded and then reclaimed at will. They are precious, fragile things, and you shattered them." He nodded, not looking up. "I know, Mom. I expect nothing. I deserve nothing." He took a ragged breath. I had to let you know that I understand now. What I lost. Who I was. What I did to you, to Dad's memory." He finally raised his eyes, and in their depths, I saw a flicker of the boy he once was, lost and afraid. Is there any hope, Mom? Not for us, not for things to be like they were. But for me? To not be this anymore?" The question hung in the crisp autumn air, a fragile, desperate plea. The fight for his soul, I realized, was his alone to wage, but perhaps a single, guiding light, however distant, was not too much to offer a son so thoroughly lost in the darkness of his own making.